with Laura Kuenssberg.
Forget the wild week in Westminster. Maybe for a moment. It's the economy's stupid after all. Paying the bills, spending political energy. There's talk of tax cuts and a benefit squeeze. Price rises have slowed down.
The inflation rate has halved compared to a year ago.
But the country's debt is enormous, with barely a sign the economy's ready to grow.
I'm a bit tired, but I don't think I've had a funny turn. David Cameron has just walked up the street and gone into 10 Downing Street.
And after a reshuffle and losing a clash with the courts over sending migrants to Rwanda,
the Home Secretary's appeal is therefore dismissed.
There are plenty more battles to come. Not that it's all rosy for Labour. Keir Starmer faced his own big rebellion this week. Yet with the autumn statement on Wednesday, our main question this morning: how does the government make its sums add up? It's Jeremy Hunt's job to try. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is with us live. Right next to his opposite number, Rachel Reeves, Labour's money woman. Yeah. Just could come up with. But the thick of it star and BAFTA winner, Joanna Scanlan, is here with her brand new TV series just hours away from kicking off. Morning, morning. I will introduce my guest with me at the desk in a second, but it is unusual that we have two opposite numbers with big, powerful jobs together at the same time. So while you are both still in the chair, Jeremy Hunt and Rachel Reeves, I want to quickly ask you a question we asked your bosses a few weeks ago. What is something you admire about each other? Because politics doesn't have to all be nasty. Jeremy Hunt, what do you admire about Rachel Reeves?
Rachel is a survivor. She's been in and out of the shadow cabinet, the shadow front bench, and she is still here, and that is a quality in politics.
And Rachel, what do you admire about Jeremy Hunt? Maybe the same thing.
Well, I was reading this week that Jeremy's a keen dancer, a Latin dancer, so you learn new things about people all the time, and I was encouraging him, I was watching Strictly last night, that maybe that'd be something he might want to take up in future.
It's never going to happen.
Well, I was going to ask you that later. Rachel's next one of my questions for our interview. Well, we'll talk to both of you at much more length later on, but there you go. It doesn't all have to be mean. But let's see how friendly they are by the end of the programme. With me listening to the chess player and Latin dancer, John McDonnell, the former Shadow Chancellor for the Labour Party and ally of Jeremy Corbyn, Siobhan Haviland from the British Chambers of Commerce, who speaks for 50,000 businesses, and the former boss of John Lewis and Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, the Conservative. Thank you all very much for being here. Let's see what's making the news today in this big week. The Telegraph features Jeremy Hunt's plan to pay you to have pylons near your home. We'll talk about that a bit more in a bit. The Sunday Times is hedging its bets on the autumn statement, the government's likely moves on tax. The Sunday Mirror is claiming the Tories have wasted £100 billion of taxpayers' cash, and we're going to see a lot of this in the next few weeks. The Sun on Sunday has Nigel Farage off to the jungle. But in a very different kind of story, the BBC website leading this morning with the latest situation in Gaza. The situation there, the World Health Organization is calling a death zone as hundreds try to flee the hospital where so much of the fighting has been. Let's start then with a focus on the economy, because that is the big event coming down the track. Andy Street, your party's had a terrible week, but what can the Chancellor say today to cheer you up?
I think the first thing the Chancellor can say is we're in a considerably better position than 12 months ago. Inflation is well down, and if the reports are right, he's got a little room for manoeuvre, which is funded room for manoeuvre. So we have definitely made real progress. The thing I'd be looking for is two things. One of the things about the last year is that many people have really been hurting with inflation up. So if there is an opportunity to put a little bit more spending power into people's pockets, that will make a difference. And the second thing is, now we're in more stable conditions, let's really get behind business growth. So incentives for business investment, really critical.
But you'd like a tax cut. Which one?
Business first, but if there is an opportunity, national insurance particularly, that if there could be a cut there, that will put spending power in and it will address that squeeze on incomes that people have talked about.
OK, Siobhan, Andy mentioned their support for business. Is there one big thing that all your members are asking for?
Well, as Andy said, support for business, growing businesses, more jobs, money back into people's pockets, more money back in taxes to the Chancellor's coffers. So that is what will get the economy growing. What we want to see is three main things: a better system for our planning so our businesses can grow, their ability to plug into the grid. We need to get to net zero. But on investment, what we want to see is expansion of full expensing, so tax breaks for business to invest.
So full expensing is where business can write off the costs of investing in new machinery and things like that. But you sounded quite greedy. You asked for three things, actually for one main thing. But
well, you've got to ask.
If you had to describe, though, briefly the state of the economy, because Andy Street said, yeah, the government feels a bit more confident, but what are your members telling you about how tough or easy things really are?
So take us back to the end of last year. It was very, very dark. We saw a bit of an increase in confidence at the beginning of the year, but actually that hasn't really translated into more investment by business.
Right, so into the real world,
into the real
really
world.
So
it's still tough conditions. Reduction in inflation is a really great thing, so more of that.
All right, John, we're in this sort of briefing moment, right, where politicians, everybody's gossiping about what might be in the statement. What do you make of what you've heard so far?
It's pre-election. It's a pre-election budget. The autumn state will be pre-election. If we get as far as the spring, it'll be a pre-election budget. And the Conservatives are just using their traditional playbook, which is offer some tax cuts, target a particularly vulnerable group. They've tried it with asylum seekers, it hasn't worked, but they're now going to target welfare benefits.
Talking about the
people.
squeeze on benefits.
Yeah, they're going to target the poorest. And I just think, just to follow on what has been said, I just think there's a complete lack of industrial strategy coming out of them whatsoever. So I think it's going to be, they're going to aim to turn things around on a sort of feel-good factor type autumn statement and a budget, but it'll be the traditional playbook, which just doesn't relate to the real world that I represent, where you've got 14 million people living in poverty out there, 4 million children. Not doing anything to address that.
Well, the gap between the real world and the kind of rhetoric we hear in Westminster is often something we talk about a lot in the studio. So let's crack on. The Chancellor does want to shout from the rooftops that we have turned a corner. Inflation fell this week, as we've heard, to the level that Rishi Sunak promised from its scarily high point early in the year. It's a better picture, theoretically, that gives the Chancellor notional cash to spend. But numbers on a page are not the same thing as our experiences in the real world. Before we talk to Mr. Hunt, have a look at this. Price tags aren't racing up as fast as they were, but costs are still rising. Food bills are a huge 30% higher than they were just a couple of years ago. And keeping a roof over your head? Rents have risen 6% in the last 12 months, with the amount of tax that goes into the government's coffers going up and up and up. Well, the Chancellor is here. No Latin dancing yet, maybe later on. We're going to talk a bit about the decisions you might make this week. But first of all, in the big picture, do you accept that a lot of people watching this morning are still finding it really hard to make ends meet?
Yes, I do. And I think, you look at all the things going on in Westminster, actually, what people at home say is their number one concern is the cost of living crisis. And for them, more than anyone else, it is significant that inflation has halved, meeting the Prime Minister's pledge. But it's also important to say it's still 4.6%. We need to get it back down to 2%. There's lots more work to do because people are still seeing, for example, food prices go up by 10% a year. We've given families an average of £3,000 of help this year and last to help get through this period. But we do recognise things are tough. We're not out of the woods yet. But I think it is also the case, as we focus on growth, that there's too much negativity about the British economy. There is a sort of defeatism. Actually, when you look at it, there's a lot going for it. One example, the sector that is going to define all of us in the next 20 years, the technology sector. We have just become the third largest in the world after the United States and China. That is going to be a tremendous strength going forward for the UK.
We'll come to some of your plans for growth later on, but I just want to stick on this point on inflation. Everybody, of course, will be pleased that price rises have slowed down, but inflation is still twice the Bank of England's target. And there's something also, I think, some people find a bit awkward about you and the Prime Minister trying to take credit for this when it is the Bank of England's job to control inflation. And the reason inflation has mainly gone down is because of global energy prices. And our viewers have absolutely picked up on this. Jeffrey Gill has emailed us in to say, why do you and Rishi Sunak claim credit for this? You must also be responsible then for increasing inflation to over 10%. So if you want credit for it going down, do you accept blame for it being so high?
Well, we know why inflation went up after the energy crisis, the biggest energy shock that we had since the Second World War. But I think it's worth listening to someone like the Governor of the Bank of England, who says, if you're going to bring inflation down, and it was over 11% when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister and I became Chancellor, then the Bank of England and the government need to work together. Now, the Bank of England's job is on interest rates, which they do independently. What the government does is make sure that we have borrowing and debt under control.
And debt's at historically high levels, so I'm not sure why you should be saying that as an advantage.
Because, as you remember, I think you interviewed me a day after I became Chancellor. I had to take some eye-watering decisions to get borrowing under control. And it was only because of those very difficult decisions that I took a year ago on both tax and spending, very difficult decisions for a Conservative Chancellor, that the government was able to play its part in helping the Bank of England bring inflation down. But now we've done that, we've got it halved, we've still got further to go. We want to look to the future. This is an autumn statement when we're going to be focusing on the long-term growth of the British economy, and we think that we have tremendous prospects.
And we'll talk about some of your plans for this week, but I want also to focus on something else that has already been happening. So at a time when inflation was so high, this government has absolutely been piling tax onto many millions of ordinary people. Tax is at record levels, and more people are having more tax taken out of their pay packet. Now, this might sound dry, but it's absolutely fundamental, because you haven't changed the level at which people start paying more tax, the tax bands. Look at this. More than 1.6 million more people, including maybe senior teachers or senior nurses, are now in the higher rate of income tax. And more than 2 million people have started paying basic rate tax who weren't paying it. That is massive. And it was a Conservative government that's done it.
Well, I don't pretend that a year ago, Laura, I did have to take very difficult decisions particularly for a Conservative Chancellor. And what I will say is that there is a difference between me and Rachel Reeves, who you'll be talking to later, because I do believe lower taxes are essential to a dynamic, thriving economy, and I do want us to go on the path of lower taxes. Why is that? Because if you look around the world, the most dynamic, thriving, energetic economies are in North America and Asia, and not in Europe.
Conservative chancellors have been saying they quite fancy the idea of low taxes for years, and you are presiding over an economy where tax is at its highest level ever, and ordinary working people are paying more and more and more income tax. Do you regret that situation? And do you think anyone who voted for you in 2019 expected there was going to be this additional £50 billion of tax rises that were put on them, some people would argue, kind of by stealth?
Well, in 2019, no one expected a once-in-a-century pandemic or an energy shock like we had in the 1970s, and we've reacted to that. And I don't pretend that I didn't have to take very difficult decisions, but because I took that, that is one of the reasons that we've been able to get inflation down. I want to get taxes down too, but let me say this about bringing down taxes. I will only do so in a responsible way. I'm not going to sacrifice the progress we've made bringing down inflation, because inflation is also a tax. It eats away at your earning power. It means that your money doesn't go as far as it used to go.
So let's translate that. You saying you don't want to do anything that could see inflation taking off again. Translate that. It means no income tax cuts this week.
Well, you'll have to wait, and then you're very experienced, Laura. You know I'm not going to give you any indication of my actual measures.
But I also know that you used to say, I won't cut income tax because it might fuel inflation. If you're saying today, I'm not going to do anything that fuel inflation, our viewers can hear you pretty clearly hinting that means no income tax cut.
Well, what I can tell you is the approach I will take on tax, which is that we will be responsible. We've made such progress in bringing down inflation. And the other thing, just listening to what Siobhan was saying earlier, is that our priority is growth. We have got a great story with the British economy, fantastic potential. We've actually grown faster than Germany, France, Japan, many major economies since 2010.
It's pretty much flatlining. It might be ahead of other countries, but I don't think that's
At
much
the
comfort
moment,
to people
at
who
the
look
moment,
at with a line going along like that.
Of course, when the Bank of England is rightly putting up interest rates to bring down inflation, then growth is subdued. But our long-term prospects are fantastic. I wouldn't choose anywhere else if I was going to say which country has got the most enormous potential. Why? Technology. But I'll just give you one more example, because I think there is too much negativity around. In the pandemic, vaccines and treatments discovered in Britain saved more lives around the world than from any other country. 7 million lives globally. So we've got a lot going for us when it comes to the industries of the future. And on Wednesday, you'll hear me talk about what more we can do.
And we'll come to some of that in a few minutes, but I want to talk about your principles behind your decisions. And I know you won't be drawn on specifics on the decisions you may or may not have already made. Have you made all the decisions yet? Yes or no?
There's still time to change
Still
things.
time to change. OK, we'll see what emails viewers send in and we can feed them into you later on.
Things, Laura, and they might find their way in.
Now, on principle, people are concerned that you may be thinking about cutting inheritance tax. And on principle, this is what would it say about a modern Conservative Party if you cut inheritance tax at the same time as so many people are struggling? And as one of our viewers said, Stuart in Sheffield, why change inheritance tax when you have the lower paid struggling to pay their bills? This isn't asking you to confirm it, it's a question of principle. Why would you do that when people are having such a hard time?
I'm sorry to say that I'm not going to be drawn on any individual taxes. I think you can read the papers this morning and you can see that I'm going to abolish every single tax there is. In fact, if you believe the papers, there wouldn't be any taxes left after Wednesday. And I'm very sorry to say I can confirm that won't be the case. I would dearly love to bring down all different types of taxes. What I would say to Stuart is this. Last year, with the pressures that we faced, I put in place support for families going through difficult times. For example, paying for around half people's electricity bills, big changes. As a result of those changes, the Office for Budget Responsibility said that we stopped the recession being as bad as it might.
Last year. What I'm asking about is a question of principle here about who you put first. And one of your former colleagues, David Gogg, told us on Newscast yesterday, he thought there was a threat of re-toxifying, to use his word, the Tory party, if you cut inheritance tax for some of the wealthiest families in the country at the same time as people are struggling and you might be squeezing benefits. Do you acknowledge that there is a risk of that?
Well, the reason I talked about last year was simply because that is my track record. That is when I had to take those decisions in principle. And I think you can see from my actions and those of Rishi Sunak that we will take difficult decisions that mean we can help people through tough times, and we are absolutely committed to doing that. But what we also want to do is to unlock high-quality jobs in the future going forward. This is going to be an autumn statement when we focus on the long-term growth of the economy. Now, at the moment, the International Monetary Fund says that after 2025, we'll actually grow faster than the other big European countries. But all those countries in Europe, including us, we're growing between sort of 1% and 2% a year. We need to be growing faster. And that's why we're going to take a lot of measures.
But again, I ask you about your priorities. And you've already, in the last year or so, you have given a tax cut to top doctors to help them with their pension costs. You have got rid of the banker's bonus cap at a time when millions of people are finding it really hard to pay the bills. Now, I think a lot of our viewers might say that actually your priorities are the wrong way around. You've already taken action to help people at the top while people at the bottom are really having a hard time.
Laura, when you interviewed me on my second day as Chancellor, I said we've got very difficult times ahead, and I promise you that what we will do, we will take the difficult decisions, but we will make sure we look after families in difficulty. What did I do after that? A month later, I announced plans that we spent £94 billion to help families through a difficult time. So if you want to know my priorities, hopefully those actions speak louder than any words.
Will this week then still be your priority? And if that is your priority, protecting people who have a hard time, can you confirm that you will follow the tradition and raise benefits at the rate of inflation in September? Now, that sounds a bit technical, but because inflation's gone down, that means the government has a choice. You could break tradition, use the lower figure, which would mean less money in the pockets of some of the most vulnerable people in this country. You can clear that up. right now? Are you going to follow convention or not?
Laura, you know that I'm not going to say this morning what I'm going to announce to Parliament on Wednesday, and it's right that I should announce it to Parliament first. But let me tell you what I've been saying about our welfare system for the last year. It is wrong when we have 1 million vacancies in the economy that we are signing off as into welfare and with no obligation to look for work over 500,000 people every year, even though many of those people would actually like to work. Surely the right thing for those people who have sickness and disability is to try and cure their sickness. So what I announced with Mel Stride this week is that we are going to give support to more than 1 million people to help them get well enough to work, including 500,000 people being given extra mental health support. And yes, there will be people who are not sick or don't have a disability, who've been out of work for a very long time. We say, look, if you're not engaging with the process, if you don't engage for 6 months, then we are going to close your case and stop your benefits. That's only fair to the taxpayers who pay those benefits. But I actually think that getting people into work, making work pay, actually is good for people. There is a philosophical difference between what we believe in the Conservatives and what the Labour Party believe. We don't believe in parking people on welfare.
But do you accept that there is a political risk if you are giving to people at the top, if you go ahead with the inheritance tax cut or doing things that you've already done, like removing the cap on bankers' bonuses and then squeezing and removing some of the support for people on benefits?
I just don't accept the characterisation that you're making. If you look at people on low pay, people on the lowest legally payable wage rate, used to be called the minimum wage, now it's called the national living wage, they have seen their after-tax incomes go up by 25% since 2010. That is a much bigger increase than people on the highest salaries. We know that if we're going to have an economy that thrives, it has to work for everyone. Okay. That means helping people on the lowest pay. We've actually reduced people on those low pay levels by half.
OK, let's look at the overall state of the country's finances, because some people in your party and some of our viewers might actually wonder why you're contemplating giving away any money at all. You have this hypothetical headroom, to use the jargon. It looks like the books are in a better state, but the debt is absolutely enormous. Your debt interest payments are absolutely enormous. Debt is not falling, despite what the Prime Minister said. Are you sure you should really be giving any money away rather than trying to either cut spending to get the debt down or keep it for a rainy day?
Well, Laura, that is the exact reason why, much as I like her as a person, I disagree with Rachel Reeves wanting to borrow an extra £28 billion a year. That would push up mortgage rates and inflation rates.
To you. My question is to you.
I believe we need to control debt. One of Rishi Sunak's pledges was to bring down debt, and I've taken very difficult decisions, quite unpalatable decisions actually, in order to make sure that we do see debt falling, and I will be consistent with that on Wednesday.
But it's not falling yet. Why are you convinced that it's the right time to start giving money back?
Well, what you will see on Wednesday is that we are being responsible in all the decisions we take. And Nigel Lawson said that borrowing was a deferred tax. It's just pushing a tax onto future generations. And as in so many things, Nigel Lawson was absolutely right.
And some of your critics might say that's actually exactly what you're doing, because it's predicted to go above 100% of GDP. But the Bank of England has warned there might not be any growth until 2025. One of the things you want to do to turn that round is to cut the time it takes to connect pylons up to the national grid. But your promise is to halve the time from 14 years down to 7. Isn't 7 years still far too long? It doesn't sound very ambitious.
Well, it might not sound ambitious, but actually it takes about that time to build a big offshore wind farm. We have the 3 biggest offshore wind farms in the world, about to have the 4th. We've actually become the 3rd largest generator of renewable electricity in Europe after Germany and Norway.
And some of those
we need to do even more.
Have sat in this studio fizzing with frustration that you've made it too hard for them to develop. It's taken too long for them to get through planning. It's taken them too long to get to the grid. And the industry organisation has said, look, yeah, they've welcomed this idea, but it could have happened years ago. You've been in charge for more than 10 years. Isn't this embarrassingly too late?
Well, when we came to power, I think 2% of our electricity came from renewable sources. in 2010. Now it's 40%. So we've made enormous progress. But I agree with those companies. We need to be much faster. In fact, it's not, by the way, just about grids. I think the whole planning system, I talk to businesses up and down the country, they say it just takes too long to get stuff approved by local authorities. So we're going to have a new system. We're going to say that local authorities have to approve business applications within a guaranteed time, or they give the money back and still process the application free of charge. So we need to do that, absolutely. And I hope today's announcement will mean, given that we have to double the amount of electricity that we generate as a country by 2050, this will help unblock some of those roadblocks that we've had.
Are you going to tell MPs like your colleague Priti Patel, who oppose the idea of having pylons in their community? I think we can see a picture of her. She's certainly not the only MP around the country who, together with their constituents, simply do not want big pylons in their communities. Now, you're saying you're going to give people, I think, £1,000 off their electricity bill a year if they agree to it, but you're going to encounter an awful lot of political resistance here, aren't you?
Well, nothing we're doing is changing people's legal right to object through the planning system. But what I think is, actually, it's as frustrating for the protesters as it is for the companies, is just the time it takes for a decision to be made. And we do need to speed that up. And in Priti's constituency, as in every constituency, many more people are driving electric cars. We have to generate lots more electricity. We will need much more infrastructure, and these measures will help unblock that.
It's been a wild week in Westminster, the kind that perhaps Rishi Sunak was meant to have said goodbye to, not least with the government losing in court on its plans to send migrants to Rwanda. As the government's money man, are you going to try and get the £140 million that's already been spent on this back?
Well, when it comes to the Rwanda policy, let me say this, because I think one of the things that was rather obscured in the stories that we read this week is that crossings have not just gone down by a third this year, but in the rest of Europe, they've gone up by a third. So we are actually making progress, but there's still 2/3 to go. Our commitment is to do what it takes to stop the boats, because we believe that the people who decide who are going to come into this country should be elected representatives in
Your main policy to do that was chucked out by the courts this week. Now we have this sort of idea there might be new laws through Parliament, and then you've got a fight in your own party about how far to go. It is a mess. And you yourself have already admitted you can't guarantee that planes will go to Rwanda before the election.
Well, it's not easy, but we are prepared to do what it takes to make sure that happens. We expect planes to be flying to Rwanda in the spring. We will change the law as necessary. We're going to do a new international treaty with Rwanda. This isn't easy stuff. If we're going to solve the problems that people are most frustrated about, it's going to take persistence, it's going to take determination. With Rishi Sunak, we have the most persistent, the most determined Prime Minister I've ever worked with. And he will make sure we...
More determined than David Cameron, who's made a surprise appearance back in government this week?
He has. Well, all Prime Ministers have their qualities. But I would say if it's...
Well, hang on, you just said Rishi Sunak was more determined than David Cameron. You told him that?
As I'm saying, all Prime Ministers have qualities. I enjoyed working with David Cameron very much. When it comes to solving fearsomely complex problems, I have never worked with anyone as phenomenal as Rishi. And I think we will see that, because I do think that when you interview me next year, we will be having a discussion about how we have succeeded in this plan. And I will be saying, look, it wasn't easy. We kept at it, but that is what we promised to do.
You say, you use the phrase there, whatever it takes. And I noted this week that Rishi Sunak also said, whatever it takes. Does that include, if you really mean it, leaving the European Convention of Human Rights, which some of your colleagues want, like the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman?
Well, we don't believe at this stage that that is necessary, but because people like you are asking the question, what we are saying is that in the end, and Rishi Sunak said this very clearly, it must be Parliament, elected representatives in Parliament, not foreign judges, who decide who can come to this country.
So that is an option for you.
We don't believe it will come to that at this stage. We think there are ways that we can avoid that. We don't want to do that. But in the end, our bottom line is very clear. It is elected representatives in Parliament who should make these decisions.
Just lastly, you talked there about elected representatives in Parliament. You confirmed this week that you will stand again in your seat. I just wonder...
I'm afraid I won't be able to get back to Latin dancing anytime soon.
Well, you see, Rachel Reeves has already stolen the idea of a question about whether or not you would ever do Strictly, like Ed Balls, who also was the Shadow Chancellor, never the Chancellor. Are you confident that you can hang on to your seat? Because I know you study the polls closely, and it doesn't look too pretty for MPs in Conservative constituencies like yours.
It's going to be a tough fight. I mean, my seat was marginal when I won it back in 2005. I've always treated it as a marginal seat. The boundaries have changed. I believe I can win it, but I don't underestimate the challenge, and I'm out knocking on doors every week. I've got a fantastic team, and to use that phrase, we'll do what it takes.
OK, Jeremy Hunt. Well, that'll be interesting. We've got that now on the record, that you think you are going to win, but it will be a difficult fight. Thanks so much for being with us in the studio on a busy week for you. What did you all think of what the Chancellor had to say? Let us know. Kuenssberg at bbc.co.uk. You know by now we do read your emails. We even sometimes use your questions. And if you use social media, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura Kay. Right then, let's get to our panel who were listening carefully. I hope, I'm sure you were all listening very carefully. Andy, you're a Conservative. It's a very tricky time for the party. What did you make of what Jeremy Hunt had to say?
Well, naturally, I agree with what he said about the hard decisions that were taken 12 months ago, and in a sense, we're rewarded by that perseverance. But I think, listening to it all, I'd like to try to connect 2 points that seem, in the way you put the questions, to be against one another. This issue, you must support citizens now with spending power, against investing in the economy for the future, everything we've talked about, growth and business. And I just want to explain why I think they're actually the same thing. The issue we face, particularly in an area like the West Midlands, is low pay. That's why, when energy bills went up, so many people were exposed. And what Jeremy was really talking about was long-term investments in the sectors that are going to matter, like technology, a booming sector in the West Midlands, getting more businesses to invest to create better productive businesses. And that's the way you increase people's income so they are less dependent. And that is, I think, our opportunity now. And if I was nudging one thing, it would be to make sure that we don't miss that opportunity.
Don't miss the boat. What do you mean by don't miss the boat?
Simply that it would be very easy, and I slightly accept what John says. In any political cycle, there's a tendency to deal with the here and now. But the real issue is, can we get more of our businesses to be more productive, paying people higher rates of pay so they are less exposed when there are situations like we've seen in the last 12 months?
Siobhan, what do you think?
So, you know, tax breaks for working people are a good thing in general. They put money back into people's pockets. That's good for business.
It doesn't sound like he was going to do that, though. I mean, he was very careful to say he's not going to do anything that could fuel inflation. And, you know, by translation, that's a pretty big hint he's not going to do an income tax cut.
Look, inflation, you know, we run a massive quarterly economic survey. Inflation's been #1 concern for businesses in the last 9 quarters. First time it's been #1 concern in 30 years. Inflation rates are coming up behind that. We definitely want to keep inflation on the trajectory it's going. But what we really want to see, and you know, we are hoping for on Wednesday, is that bit about helping businesses get back to growth, more jobs, you know, using tax breaks for businesses to help them expand and innovate. I have the joy of travelling the country and meeting British businesses week in and week out, and we do have amazing businesses innovating, growing despite challenges, and we need to help them on that path.
John, what did you reckon? These two both sound quite positive.
Well, I just think he's not in the real world. With regard to growth, you put it to him, he's flatlined. There's been zero growth the last 3 months. In the Eurozone, it's 2.9%. In America, above 60% consistently. I think we've got a crisis. I go back to it, we've got a crisis of poverty in this country. Last month, the Joseph Rowntree Trust said we've now got destitution, 1 million suffering destitution. Destitution means you can't heat, you can't feed yourself, you can't keep yourself warm, and you can't even clothe yourself. That's the first thing. So he's not in that real world. The second thing, I think he will come under pressure for tax cuts in some form. If he goes for inheritance tax, 80% of that will go to the richest 4%. I don't think there's any strategy there whatsoever. The industrial strategy, with Andy, I sympathise with Andy because one part of the industrial strategy was our transport network. And what do? They scrap HS2 from going north of Birmingham. I think it's a disaster. I just don't think he's in the real world. We've got a crisis in public services. We've got a crisis in terms of climate change. I heard nothing about tackling those.
And let's pick up then on HS2, because you said, Andy, that you really want to see investment in business, but I've heard you so many times, including in this studio, talk so passionately about why high-speed rail was part of that, and then it's been cut up. Now, I know you were really frustrated by this at the time of the Tory party conference. Did you actually get close to quitting?
So I thought about it. Everybody knows that. But I did not quit, of course, because actually There is much, much more to admire in the Conservative Party than just one issue. And I want to be there to make sure the Conservative Party in the future is shaped for my vision of conservatism, which is a moderate, inclusive, socially liberal party. And you cannot influence that by being outside the party. But can I just come back on something that John said, though? Because, yes, I'm on the record very clearly about HS2, and we did not prevail over that. But it isn't accurate to say the government isn't investing in the future of other parts of our economy. If you just look at another really important deal for the West Midlands, what the Chancellor did with Tata for their battery factory, what's been done for the future of steel, what's been done for the future of tech, those are all the parts of industrial strategy going forward. They might not have that name, but the actions are around that.
John, you're rolling your eyes.
It's just 5 years too late. And what does he do? We're facing a climate catastrophe. He's attacking Rachel for investing in tackling climate change. That's about investing in alternative energy sources, a consistent industrial strategy which will get us those jobs. And that's the one thing he attacked Rachel for. I just found it's just not of the real world.
Except today, the announcement from the Chancellor is about trying to speed things up to get renewable energy projects connected up to the grid. Don't you welcome that?
You need the investment, first of all. Of course, there'll be planning reform, but you need the investment. And a lot of that investment, as in every other country, a lot of that will start with public investment, first of all. That will then lever in private investment.
And you said there you wanted to stay in the Conservative Party to make sure that it was inclusive and socially liberal.
Yes.
Now, the strong implication there is that you're concerned that it was potentially not going off in that direction. Does your vision of an inclusive, socially liberal, modern Conservative Party include giving inheritance tax cuts to the wealthiest families in the country?
OK. So you asked me what my priorities would be for the budget, and you will note I did not talk about inheritance tax.
So would it be a mistake to go with that
policy? It would not be my personal choice of where at this time one should invest any headroom that there is.
And Siobhan, do you think that's something that business owners actually would find appealing? Would it make any difference to them?
Inheritance tax impacts 4% of the population. So for businesses, what they're looking to is what John was referring to. We have 1 million open roles in this country. Businesses can't grow because they can't find the people they need with the right skills. Exactly. And what we want to do is get people into work, back to work. You know, not people who can't work, but people who have the right skills, and you can match that with the business, and or helping people get the skills to get back into work. That's what we want to focus.
He raised the issue about people being on incapacity benefit and sickness benefit. We've got 7.9 million people on waiting lists for treatment in our NHS. A lot of those people are sick and on incapacity benefit desperately need those treatments to be able to get them back into work.
We'll talk to Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, in a few minutes' time. But just as we're here, obviously a conversation we've had a lot in the studio in the last few weeks is about the awful situation in Gaza. And John, you've been a prominent figure attending many of the marches in support of Palestinians in central London. Now, of course, not everybody in attendance has done this, but we've all seen it with our own eyes, evidence of people holding up anti-Semitic signs, chanting, shouting, calling out things that are plainly offensive, not just to Jewish people, but to many other people too. Does it not bother you when you go along to those events? And wouldn't it be better if people who are leading figures in that movement took a much more public stand on this?
No, because the overwhelming...
Doesn't bother you?
No, well, it bothers me, those chants when I take, but they're so small a minority. We've got the powers to deal with that. So the organisers of the events, I've sat down with them, working with the police, are saying, if there are people like that, take them out. Use the full force of the law against them.
But when you've been at these events...
apart from that, the vast majority, 800,000 last time I was there, are calling for ceasefire and peace. And I walked beside on both occasions. I know I've been criticised because one person was identified as supporting Hamas. He's denied that. But each time I walked beside, first of all, a young Jewish woman called Ellie from NAMOD, the Young Jewish Group, and the second time, Jenny Manson, the Secretary of the Jewish Voice for Labour. And I've tried to be careful to demonstrate, actually, this isn't just Muslim people here. This is about a large number of Jewish people, people of all faith and no faith, young people, all calling for peace and a ceasefire, and I support that.
And if you've seen any evidence of that, have you challenged people at these events? Have you gone up to anybody and said, please don't say that, don't shout that?
I personally haven't seen any, but I would challenge it. But I've said to the organisers, you need to make sure you are, and they have done.
OK, all right, all three of you, thank you so much indeed for now. We'll be back with you at the end of the show, because it is Rachel Reeves' turn. We had a glimpse of her at the beginning of the programme alongside Jeremy Hunt, whose job she wants. She's one of Keir Starmer's closest allies. And if you believe the current opinion polls and they stay that way, then perhaps round about this year, the removal vans will be moving her stuff into number 11. But that is a long way away, of course, in politics. And she's with us here this morning. Welcome to the studio, Rachel.
Good morning.
Now, you're not announcing big new plans today, but you're carefully listening and scrutinising what the Chancellor has been saying. And we'd like to work out what you might do differently. So if the Chancellor goes ahead with cutting inheritance tax, would Labour pledge to reverse it?
Cutting inheritance tax in the middle of a massive cost of living crisis and when public services are on their knees is not the right priority. I understand people's desire to pass on to their children what they've worked hard for, but right now that is not the right thing to do and we would not support it.
And if you inherited it, however, if you win the election and the change had been made, would you reverse it? Would you make that pledge now?
Well, I will set out all of our plans that will be fully costed and fully funded in our manifesto. But I think I've been very clear. This is not a priority. It is not something that I would be doing. I'd be much more keen on... You know, I make no apology for wanting working people to have more money in their pockets. I've been saying that for some time. When Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, tried to increase national insurance, I opposed it, and the government eventually had to back down. I want taxes on working people to be lower, and so if that's affordable, that would be my priority as Chancellor.
But if it's such a terrible idea to cut inheritance tax, would you, and I've heard that you would oppose it very strongly right now, but would you commit, therefore, that you would reverse that if you were in government?
The thing is, Laura, I don't want to write the manifesto here on your programme, but I don't think I could be any clearer. This would not be a priority for me. It is not the right thing to do.
OK, one of the other proposals that's been floated this week is these new sanctions for people, as we heard from Jeremy Hunt, who are judged to be able to work, but they don't make the effort, or they don't take a job, they don't put things that are put in front of them. Would you reverse the changes that Jeremy Hunt described this morning?
Well, they've been in power now for 13 years. If it's the case that people can play the system and not look for work whilst claiming taxpayers' money, that's on them. What have they been doing for 13 years? For me, it's about tackling the root cause of the problem. There are 7.8 million people on hospital waiting lists, and there are 2.6 million people who are off work sick. Those two things are linked. We've got to get our NHS functioning properly because that's the way to get our economy working properly. And so that's why we've committed to putting more money into our NHS by getting rid of the non-dom tax status, 2 million additional appointments every year in our NHS to get those waiting lists down and to get people back to work. That's what I would be doing if I was Chancellor.
But you use a phrase there, though. You said, if there are people playing the system. Do you think there are some people playing the system, notwithstanding the very many people who have genuine health issues?
I think the vast majority of people, vast majority of people desperately want work.
That's not my question, though. You used the phrase playing the system. Do you think there are some people, however small a group, who are playing the system?
Look, the government, the point I'm making is the government have been in power for 13 years and they're just saying now that we need to make sure that people are looking for work. Absolutely. There needs to be a condition that if you are accessing taxpayer support, then the condition to that is that you need to be looking for work. And if the government are now saying that that's not happening, they need to sort that out.
But is it your belief that there are people who are...
that the reason you've got so many people out of work, we're the only G7 economy that has fewer people participating in the labour market now than before the pandemic, that the reason for that is our NHS is not functioning properly after 13 years of Conservative government.
But you're an experienced politician, you've been a constituency MP for a long time, dealing with all sorts of casework and people's lives. Is it your personal belief that there are people who play the system, to use your phrase? Do you think that happens, however small the group might be?
No, it's my personal belief that people are desperate to improve the lives of them and their families, that there are too many people who come to see me at my surgeries who are struggling to put food on the table, are struggling to pay their rents, and I want to help them to get work, and that starts by fixing our National Health Service so that people whose lives are on hold because they're waiting for appointments, scans, operations, that they can get better and get back into work. And if the government are serious about getting more people back into work, they need to get serious about fixing the crisis in our National Health Service.
And the level of benefit payments matter enormously to some of those people that you mentioned there. And of course, we should remind our viewers that many people on working age benefits also have jobs. Benefits are often the top-ups for them.
This is absolutely the case. And I was actually in a place where you wouldn't expect there to be food banks, in Croydon, on the edge of the sort of Surrey border, the south of Croydon in Purley last week. And people there who are having to access food banks because their rents have gone up so much that they are now struggling to both pay that rent and put food on the table. These are harrowing stories of people in work who now are struggling to support their families.
But on those benefit payments that go to lots of people who have jobs, do you think that benefits should continue to rise, as is tradition, with the level of inflation from September?
Yes, I do.
And if you win the election and you inherit a situation where they have gone up by a lower level, would you reverse that and do a top-up?
Well, look, the election's likely to come in a year's time and the government would have already implemented that. But in government, I will use the inflation rate that is traditional, the September inflation, to uprate benefits.
So
and that's something that I commit to.
you would always commit to
government.
using the September.
I think that's the right thing to do. If you pick and choose from year to year which inflation number is the cheapest thing to do, then what you see is the gradual erosion of people's incomes. And, you know, half of the people who are claiming universal credit, around half of those people are also in work. And this is to top up low pay and insecure work. And I don't think the government should just pick and choose for them. Okay. They have a responsibility to ensure that everybody can afford, in a civilised country, to put food on the table, to pay their rent and pay their gas and electricity bills. And sadly, for too many people, after 13 years of Conservative government, they are worse off and they're not even able to afford those basics.
And you've made that very clear. You would stick with the September measure in perpetuity if you win the election. Keir Starmer has tried to draw a line under your party's divides over the conflict in Gaza. But there was a significant rebellion this week, some frontbenchers quitting their jobs because Keir Starmer will not call for a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza. He's chosen a different tack to follow the idea that there should be pauses in the conflict to get more aid in. But there's a lot of unhappiness. There were protests outside Keir Starmer's constituency office yesterday. I think we can show viewers some pictures of that. Are you comfortable for people to leave the Labour Party over this if they don't agree?
I was really sorry to see colleagues resign last week from the front bench. But being leader and hopefully next year being Prime Minister, Keir's going to have to make incredibly difficult decisions and he's going to have to do what he thinks is right and offer that leadership even in difficult times. And there will be difficult decisions if we form the next government, but that's what leadership is all about. What I find very concerning is the huge pressure that MPs have been put on, both leading up to the vote, but also what we've seen this week. I support the right to protest. Suella Braverman's comments about these being hate marches, etc., are appalling, but I don't support the intimidation of members of Parliament. And I think that's what you're seeing with some of these protests now, outside of people's offices and outside of people's homes. And MPs have got a difficult job to do, all public servants do. And this sort of intimidation and taking protests to people's homes, I think that goes beyond the line.
Has that happened to you?
It hasn't happened to me, but it's happened to colleagues. I don't like it. It's not acceptable. And I think that we need a bit of civility and decency in our public discourse. And I'm afraid that some of these protests are now crossing the line.
Just before you go, it's a while since you've been in the studio and it's been a very busy time for you since then. But one of the things that happened is that you published your book about women in economics. But forgive me for bringing this up, it also emerged that some of the book had been lifted from Wikipedia. Now, some people made a bit of a laugh and a joke about it, but for other people, it's a bit of an issue of trust. So, what went wrong?
Well, look, I put my hands up as soon as those issues were pointed out. The editing, the referencing, it should have been better than it was. I put my hands up to that, and I've said that I will put that right.
OK, Rachel Reeves, it's always great to have you in the studio. I'm just going to ask you, did you used to watch The Thick of It?
I did, and I'm looking forward to seeing Joanna in her the new programme that's just about to come out as well. But I think, as you said earlier, some of the stuff that's going on in politics, the revolving door, the 5 prime ministers, 7 chancellors, 9 business secretaries. I mean, I think that Amanda Iannucci would be struggling to write something that is more crazy than what we've seen, frankly, in the last few years.
OK, well, let's get on and hear from Joanna then. Rachel Reeves, thank you so much for joining us here today. As Rachel was saying, we all know in the last few years it's been hard to watch politics without thinking, my God, you couldn't make that up. But some time ago, as we've been talking about, some very gifted writers did try to make it up with The Thick of It, that comedy series about Westminster. Plenty of people I know told me it wasn't really funny because it was so close to the bone. And Joanna Scanlan was one of the stars. But since then, she's won a BAFTA, and in a matter of hours, she's in prime position on TV with a new BBC One Sunday night drama, Boat Story. Let's take a look.
I can't imagine how you must be feeling.
We didn't know each other that well.
Oh.
Still, my son. You know?
Of course. I'm not sure how I can really help.
I need to know everything. The police, they said you saw someone near the boat, but they would say no more.
Now, here she is. Now, tell us about Boat Story, then. What's it about? But don't give the plot away. No spoilers, please.
No, I've been told, in no uncertain terms, I cannot tell any spoilers. And that's because it is a really exciting ride. I don't think you could guess when it starts any of the directions it's going to go in. It's all about subverting expectations. And it's a brilliant title, Boat Story, because it's about stories. And it starts with one of those dilemmas that any great fable might begin with, which is you're standing on a beach, there's a boat, there's 2 dead bodies, and there's several tons of cocaine, and you need money. What are you going to do? And these 2 characters that Daisy and Patterson play take the money, forgetting that somebody owns it, so, the cocaine, and consequences ensue.
And for your character, Pat, how does she fit into the story, and what was it like playing her?
Oh, it was wonderful playing her. It was wonderful because Jack and Harry Williams, who were the writers, started off by giving me a script and a character. And by the end of the shoot, it is no lie to say that I was playing something completely different. And so it was a wonderful experience because it was incredibly creative. They are really creative writers.
And you're a writer yourself. I mean, so is that something that was a new experience to you, to see something evolve so much during the shooting of a drama?
Yeah, I think it was actually. It was as if they were watching the rushes from the day before and then coming in with, usually what happens, you know, with amends, as they call them, when you get script amends, it's about making sure that the new location works or that there's a bit of clarity. This wasn't that. Right. This was genuinely changing the story. And that, as a writer, I would never be able to do that. I mean, they are extraordinary. It was a really, really good experience.
And this is going to go in, you know, the Sunday night big drama slot. Who do you think will love this? Will it be people who, you know, love Happy Valley or Line of Duty? Is it that kind of thing that people should look forward to?
Well, you say it's going out Sunday night, 9 o'clock, and it is, but it's also dropping online, the whole lot, I think, today.
Oh, so you can binge? Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, you can binge. And I think that's because genuinely, I think it's something that really young people are going to enjoy. And that's because it's impactful, it's quite violent, it's very funny, but it's a big thriller ride at the same time. So all of that kind of makes it, if it's not necessarily young people, it's the youngness of you that will enjoy it.
We're all young. We're all young here, especially for our audience, as well as all being young. I think most people watching will have very fond memories of watching The Thick of It. Let's refresh the devastating silence of judgment there. Do you think it could be made today, do you think?
I think you'd have to change the genre from sort of satire with absurdist elements to weepy. I think you're going to have to shift it into being a weepy because there's not a lot to laugh about.
Oh dear, but do you think that it would be popular though now, sort of political satire? And think of writing one yourself?
in a way, I think there are angles you could come at it from. But because of social media, because of technology, because of the absolute welter of massive information overload, I think it's hard to take a stand back and look at it as a whole. So I think you need to get into one very specific bit of it and work from there.
OK, well, maybe you'll write one day, and you can always welcome to come in the studio and observe if you need to see what happens in real life politics. But Joanna Scanlan, thank you so much for coming into the studio, and very good luck with Vote Story. That starts tonight. Right then, it has been a packed 58 minutes, I suppose, but we are racing towards 10 o'clock ahead of a very big week for the government when, as we asked at the start of the show, the Chancellor has to answer the question, how is he going to make the sums add up? Here he was a few minutes ago.
We've been able to get inflation down. I want to get taxes down too, but let me say this about bringing down taxes. I will only do so in a responsible way. I'm not going to sacrifice the progress we've made bringing down inflation, because inflation is also a tax. It eats away at your earning power. It means that your money doesn't go as far as it used to go.
So, Andy Street, what's your big prediction for the next few days then?
That Jeremy will balance this issue of giving a little to people and investing for the future.
And do you think that it will calm down the very, very high tempers and anger inside your party?
Well, interesting, the whole theme for your programme is it's been an incredible 7 days. I think it's been the beginning of the future, because actually the Prime Minister's made his choice. Bringing David Cameron back is really important about reinforcing the team, united team going forward.
That's very interesting, because not everybody thinks that in the Conservative Party. So you think it is back to the future?
It's a good decision. David Cameron is an incredibly experienced leader, and it will help bring unity.
John, does it make it harder or easier for Labour to have a go at the Tories if they've got David Cameron in the cabinet?
Easier, because of the overhang of Greensill, the scandal around Greensill.
Around the finance company.
That's right. The link with China. More revelations today about his role in Sri Lanka, linked to a company that has already been sanctioned. I think there's more to come out of this. And remember, select committees criticised him for significant lapse of judgment. So I think, no, make it easier. I think this appointment was embarrassing, to be honest.
Interesting. Siobhan, thinking about it all, having heard Rachel Reeves, having heard the Chancellor, for you, who's the party of business now?
We speak to all parties, to the whole political spectrum. But what we always have. It's really important. Yeah. But coming back to what you've heard, what we want to see is we want to see the economy getting back to power.
OK, and as I've got you all, very quickly, we've been talking about the thick of it. What's the silliest thing that's happened to you in politics?
Oh, it has to be very recent over HS2, the debates between the ministerial bedrooms in Manchester. That's where party conferences actually happen.
Debates in ministerial bedrooms, goodness me.
Anti-bedroom, you might call it.
The silliest thing, John?
The worst thing for me is I cut myself shaving just before a conference speech. And it was Jeremy Corbyn's conference speech, and they did, I'm bleeding like mad. So they said, what do you, stick a plaster on, but do this all through.
And did you actually do it?
I had to. I looked like Rodin's statue all the way through.
We're going to go and dig out the pictures. And Siobhan, you used to work in Downing Street. Very quickly, what's the silliest thing that happened to you?
I did. I spent 2 years there. I was in Brussels this week, and it reminded me of those 2 years through the Brexit negotiations, the meaningful votes, the backstops, and I was just like, sometimes we were like, are we in an episode of the thick of it?
All right, well, all three of you, thank you for being in the thick of it this morning. See what I did there? Thank you also to you, of course, for watching. And the next few days really do matter, not just for our politicians, but for all of us, for businesses to make money and create jobs, for families to make ends meet. Jeremy Hunt wants you to think the economy has improved enough to give him space to dangle the odd tax cut or two. But he's still coy about which ones ahead of the official statements on Wednesday. Yet there are stubborn problems for the economy, giant debts and measly growth. And that probably can't be fixed by one Chancellor alone. In the next few days, here at the BBC, we'll have all the coverage you need to make sense of the politics and the purse strings. But in a few minutes today, I'll be with Paddy O'Connell. We can see him there. We'll be recording today's edition of Newscast. You can catch that on BBC Sounds. You can watch this programme again on iPlayer. And if you can't get to any of that, we'll be back on BBC One next Sunday, same time, same place. Goodbye.
Newscast is different to the stuff that we all do in our day jobs because it's like a proper